Imagine stepping back, like thousands and thousands of years, right into the dawn of one of the world's most, well, enduring and complex civilizations.
It's quite a journey to think about.
Yeah, today we're embarking on a real deep dive, something truly ancient, incredibly fascinating. We're looking at the intertwined roots of the Indus Valley civilization and uh, the Vedic traditions.
And how they ultimately shaped what we now understand as early Hinduism.
Exactly. So for you, our listener, our mission today really is to sift through all the clues, the archaeological whispers, those ancient hymns, the scholarly debates.
Which are definitely ongoing.
Oh, absolutely. To piece together how these two seemingly distinct cultures kind of converged and gave birth to this spiritual lineage that amazingly thrives to this day.
It really is like being a detective, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're uncovering clues from a time when written records were scarce, or, well, in the case of the Indus script,
It's still a complete mystery.
a profound mystery.
Yeah.
It tantalizes us with all these untold stories just out of reach.
That's such a crucial point. We need to be clear about what we think we know, based on evidence, what we suspect maybe, and where the biggest questions still lie. We're kind of pushing the boundaries here.
You really are.
So we'll start with the Indus Valley Civilization, the IVC. Super advanced, but still, enigmatic. We'll explore their cities, their planning.
Which is just astonishing.
Right. And what their artifacts, the things they left behind, might tell us about their beliefs.
Then we'll shift focus, move forward in time to the Vedic period, dive into their incredibly rich oral traditions, their pantheon of gods.
A very different feel in some ways.
In some ways, yes. And then, the really interesting part, bringing these two worlds together, we'll examine the surprising connections, the potential links.
And, of course, the enduring academic debates.
Wow.
Because it's not all settled history, is it?
Not by a long shot. That's what makes it so fascinating. These debates continue to shape our understanding of Hinduism's origins.
So what does this all mean for understanding one of the world's most ancient, most vibrant religions? Let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Okay, so our journey begins way back, Bronze Age. We're talking about one of the most remarkable and, like I said, still mysterious civilizations, the Indus Valley Civilization, the IVC.
And the timescale here is huge. We're looking at roughly, say, 3,300 BCE kicking off, and it lasts in various forms until around 1300 BCE.
So it's right there alongside ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia.
Absolutely. Contemporary with them, and in terms of sheer geographical scale, it actually eclipsed them. It was massive.
Really? Bigger than Egypt and Mesopotamia.
Geographically, yes.
Yeah.
Its reach was immense. It stretched across what's now modern-day Pakistan, parts of Afghanistan, northwest India, centered around the Indus River and its tributaries, obviously.
We're talking a huge area then.
Huge.
Right.
Roughly 1 million square kilometers. Think about that, far larger than many other Bronze Age civilizations combined. And what's really striking is how uniform, in many ways, their culture seems to have been across that vast space. The urban planning, the artifacts.
Yeah, let's talk about those cities, because they weren't just random settlements, were they? Places like Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro.
Elobra, Lothal, Rocky Gari, the list goes on. And they show this astonishingly advanced city planning.
What do you mean by advanced?
Well, sophisticated grid layouts, streets laid out, often, north, south, east, west, really organized structures, not the sort of winding organic growth you see in many other ancient cities.
So planned from the get-go, almost.
It certainly looks that way. You see evidence of precise engineering. Think about the bricks' standardized sizes, the same ratios used across hundreds and hundreds of miles.
Wow. That implies some kind of central coordination.
Exactly. A level of centralized planning, or at least widely accepted standards, and civic organization that, rivals or even exceeds some of its contemporaries.
And it wasn't just the layout, right? I remember reading about the standardization.
You're right. It's striking. Not just brick sizes. We find these standardized weights and measures across the entire civilization. Little cubes, often made of chert, in zip-specific ratios.
Okay, why is that such a big deal?
Well, it's not just a quirky detail. It strongly suggests a highly organized society, a robust, well-regulated economy. It means they could trade reliably, internally, across these vast distances.
And externally, too.
Definitely. It facilitated complex trade networks. We'll probably get into that more.
And the infrastructure within the cities, I heard it was impressive.
Beyond impressive, honestly. We're talking complex sewage and drainage systems, far more advanced than many other ancient civilizations.
Like how advanced?
Individual homes often had private bathing areas, toilets even. connected to this sophisticated network of covered drains running beneath the city streets, lined with bricks, carefully sloped.
Covered drains in the Bronze Age.
Yes, it's a real testament to their engineering skill. And, maybe an understanding of public health that was centuries ahead of its time.
Wow. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What else did they figure out?
It does. And that kind of internal organization, that infrastructure, it certainly helped support those extensive trade networks you mentioned.
Right. Trade. Where were they trading?
Evidence suggests quite far afield. Mesopotamia, for sure. Possibly parts of the Arabian Peninsula, maybe even further.
How do we know?
Well, we find Harappan seals those little carved stones in Mesopotamian cities like Ur, dating back to maybe 2300 BCE. They were probably used like commercial documents or maybe ownership markers.
So Indus stuff turning up in Iraq.
Exactly. And conversely, materials found in Indus sites show their reach. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, carnelian beads, probably from Gujarat, copper, shell, wood from coastal regions. It points to this intricate web of exchange.
So they weren't isolated at all. They were plugged into the Bronze Age world economy.
Deeply integrated.
Yeah.
Which, makes their eventual decline even more perplexing in some ways.
Okay, but here's the massive catch, isn't it? The elephant in the room.
The script.
The Indus script. Despite all these advancements, the cities, the trade, the plumbing, we can't read what they wrote.
We can't. We have thousands of examples, mostly short inscriptions on seals, pottery, little tablets.
But
it remains undeciphered.
So unlike the Egyptians with their hieroglyphs, or the Mesopotamians with cuneiform,
who left us libraries full of records, myths, king lists, letters.
We don't have the Indus people's own words. We don't know what they called their kings or their gods or what their myths were about, not from their own writing anyway.
Which raises that profound question you mentioned earlier. How do we understand a civilization's spiritual life, its worldview, without their own voice?
It's like, trying to get the plot of a novel just from the cover art.
It's precisely that challenge. When we try to unearth the religious practices of the IVC through archaeology, we're solving a puzzle with crucial pieces missing. We have to rely entirely on interpretation.
Interpretation of the stuff they left behind, the material culture.
Exactly. We had to be meticulous in observing, but also, let's be honest, imaginative in interpreting. And always acknowledging the limits. We just don't know for sure in many cases.
Okay, so where do we see the clearest hints of their religious life? Those seals you mentioned.
The seals are a major source, yes. Found in abundance, especially in places like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. Small, usually square, intricately carved objects. Steatite mostly, then fired.
They have pictures on them.
Often, yes. Lots of animal figures. Bulls are very common. Elephants, rhinos, tigers. Mythical creatures, too, like unicorns.
Unicorns, seriously?
Well, single-horned, bull-like creatures, whether they meant unicorn in our sense, who knows? But it's the human-like figures, sometimes combined with animal features, that really grab our attention for religious interpretation.
Ah, right. This is where the famous one comes in.
The Pashupati seal, found at Mohenjo-daro. It's probably the most discussed artifact in this context.
Describe it for us. What does it actually show?
Okay, visually it depicts this figure. Could be male, could be ambiguous, seated in a very distinctive posture. Knees out, heels together, almost like a yoga pose, a meditative posture.
Like lotus position.
Sort of, yeah. Sometimes called Mulabandhasana. And this central figure is surrounded by animals. An elephant, a tiger, a rhino, a buffalo. Below the stool or platform he's on, there are 2 deer.
Okay. And the figure itself?
Often depicted with multiple faces, maybe 3, maybe 4, depending on how you see it. And a prominent headdress, which many interpret as horns. Some renderings also suggest a phallic aspect, though that's debated too.
Right. And this is the one linked to Shiva.
This is the core of the interpretation, yes. Yeah. Pioneered, really, by John Marshall, the archaeologist who oversaw the early excavations. He saw this figure and immediately thought of Shiva.
Why Shiva specifically?
Because in later Hinduism, Shiva has the epithet Pashupati. It means Lord of Animals or Lord of Beasts.
Ah, okay. Pashupati, Lord of Animals. And the seal shows a figure surrounded by animals.
Exactly. Plus, the yogic posture resonates with Shiva as the great yogin, the master ascetic. The possible horns linked to some depictions of Shiva, or perhaps bull symbolism associated with him. The potential phallic aspect connects to Shiva's role as a generative fertility deity.
So the visual parallels seem quite strong.
They are compelling. And if this interpretation holds, it's huge. It suggests that a figure with attributes very similar to a major Hindu god existed millennia before the Vedas were even composed. It points towards that idea of syncretism, of blending, right at the roots.
It challenges that idea of Hinduism just arriving fully formed with the Vedas.
Precisely. It suggests deeper, pre-Vedic indigenous roots for some core concepts, but
There's always a but in archaeology, isn't there?
usually,
Mhm.
this interpretation isn't universally accepted, and the debate is ongoing, which is fascinating in itself.
So what are the counter-arguments?
Well, some scholars, like Gavin Flood, for instance, are more cautious. They point out that while the visual similarities are there, calling it Proto-Shiva might be reading too much back from later Hinduism.
So it could be something else?
It could be a local deity we know nothing else about.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a shaman figure, given the animal connections. Maybe a representation of a Treasley figure. Or even a composite divine figure whose identity didn't directly survive into later traditions in that exact form.
The problem is, again, no text to tell us this is X, Lord of Animals.
Exactly. How much can we really infer from iconography alone across thousands of years? It's a fundamental question. We're bridging a huge gap with no written confirmation, so conjecture and scholarly interpretation play a big role.
Okay, so the Pashupati seal is intriguing but debated. What other evidence do we have for IVC religion?
Figurines. Lots and lots of terracotta female figurines found throughout Indus sites.
What do they look like?
Typically quite robust, standing figures, often with elaborate headdresses, sometimes fan-shaped, often adorned with jewelry, necklaces, belts. Some are quite stylized,
And the interpretation here.
almost universally associated with fertility goddesses,
Hmm.
or perhaps a mother goddess concept. This is a really common theme in early agricultural societies worldwide. Mesopotamia, ancient Europe, you find similar figures.
Makes sense, right? If your life depends on crops growing and people having children.
You'd naturally revere the forces believed to control fertility and abundance. The theory is these figurines, often found in homes, suggest fertility rituals were important, maybe household-level practices, vital for an agrarian economy.
So a connection to the earth, to life-giving forces, maybe a strong feminine principle in their spirituality.
That seems very likely. A deep reverence for the feminine as a source of creation and sustenance.
Okay. Seals, figurines. What else? You mentioned infrastructure earlier. Any religious angle there?
Absolutely. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro. This is one of the most iconic structures of the IVC.
Describe it. How great was it?
Pretty great. It's a large rectangular tank, about 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, maybe 2.4 meters deep, built with incredibly precise, tightly fitted bricks, and lined with bitumen natural tar to make it watertight.
So like a swimming pool.
Structurally, yes, but its location within what seems to be a ceremonial precinct or citadel area and its careful construction suggests it wasn't for leisure.
Ah, so religious use.
That's the widely accepted interpretation. Ritual purification, ritual bathing. There are steps leading down into the water from two sides, and evidence of rooms around it, maybe changing rooms or priestly quarters, a very careful system for filling and draining it too.
And the connection to later Hinduism there seems pretty direct.
It's very suggestive, isn't it? The immense importance of water for cleansing, for spiritual purity in Hinduism,
Yeah.
ritual bathing in sacred rivers like the Ganges.
Yeah, ghats, temples near water. It's central.
It seems to have incredibly deep roots, stretching right back here to the Indus Valley. The Great Bath might be the earliest large-scale evidence of this profound reverence for water as a purifying element.
More than just engineering, then. It's a window into their spiritual practice.
Absolutely. And think about it, for an agricultural society dependent on the river, water was life. So imbuing it with sacred purifying qualities makes perfect sense.
Any other structures? Altars? Temples?
Well, we do find structures interpreted as fire altars,
Mm.
particularly at sites like Calibangan and Lothal. Not huge, but distinct brick-lined pits.
What's in them?
Evidence of ash, charcoal, sometimes terracotta cakes or objects, suggesting fire was used ritually, maybe for offerings, cleansing, possibly sacrifice ceremonies.
Fire. That sounds Vedic, too.
It does. Fire plays a huge role in Vedic ritual, as we'll see. So again, a potential point of continuity, or at least a shared focus on elemental forces.
But what about temples? Like big buildings dedicated to gods?
That's the puzzling thing. Unlike Mesopotamia or Egypt, with their massive, unmistakable temples dominating cities,
We don't really find those in the Indus Valley.
not definitively identified, no.
Mm.
There are large buildings like the so-called granaries or assembly halls, but nothing that screams temple in the way a ziggurat or an Egyptian temple complex does.
What does that imply? Did they not have gods, or?
Well, they almost certainly had gods or divine forces.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe their worship was different, perhaps more home-centered, focusing on those figurines. Or maybe communal rituals happened in open spaces, or near the Great Bath, or in buildings we just haven't recognized as religious yet because they don't fit our expectations.
So a different kind of religious landscape. Less monumental, perhaps.
Perhaps. Or maybe power wasn't expressed through massive temples in the same way. It forces us to question our assumptions about what religion looks like archaeologically.
Okay, so taking all that evidence, seals, figurines, the bath, fire altars, lack of temples, what can we infer about their society? Was it run by priests?
It's tough to say definitively. There's evidence for social hierarchy, different house sizes, the big public structures imply organization and labor mobilization.
But maybe not as rigid as Egypt with a god-king pharaoh.
Probably not as overtly hierarchical or focused on a single divine ruler, no. It seems less monumental in its expression of power compared to Egypt or Mesopotamia.
Did religion support the social order?
It almost certainly did, as it usually does. Those figures on the seals, maybe the people overseeing rituals at the Great Bath, they likely held important positions. Priests, maybe. Or perhaps religious leaders who were also part of a ruling elite. Maybe merchants.
So could it have been a theocracy ruled by priests?
Some speculate that. Others suggest maybe a more mercantile elite held power, using religion for legitimacy. Or perhaps power was more decentralized. The truth is, the debate continues. Was it theocratic? Was it more egalitarian in some ways?
In the script.
The script holds the key. Without it, we're making educated inferences based on silent stones and city plans.
Right. Okay, so these incredible cities, this advanced civilization, eventually it declines.
Yes, starting around 1900 BCE, we see a gradual decline and transformation. The big cities shrink or are abandoned. The uniformity breaks down.
Why? What happened?
Likely a combination of factors, not one single catastrophe. Climate change seems a major player, shifts in monsoon patterns affecting agriculture.
Rivers changing course. The Indus system is dynamic.
Very much so. Shifts in river courses could have disrupted agriculture, trade routes, and undermined the foundations of major cities. Maybe internal social unrest, breakdown of trade networks. It was probably complex.
And it's around this time of decline.
That the stage is set for a new cultural dynamic in the region. This is when we start talking about the Vedic period.
And the arrival or migration of new groups of people?
Yes. The migration of Indo-European speaking communities, often called Aryans, though that term is loaded. More precisely, Indo-Iranians, a branch of the Indo-European language family, migrating into South Asia from the northwest, likely over centuries.
And this is crucial for understanding early Hinduism, right? This transition.
Absolutely critical. Because Vedic beliefs, the foundation of so much in Hinduism, aren't thought to have formed in a vacuum.
They interacted with what was already there.
Exactly. It's believed to be a process of interaction, synthesis, blending with the indigenous beliefs of the late Indus Valley and other existing cultures in the subcontinent. Not just replacement, but exchange and mutual influence.
Creating something new.
Something new and distinct, yes.
So the Vedic beliefs, where do we learn about them? The texts.
The Vedas, the foundational scriptures. And the oldest, most important one is the Rig Veda.
When was that composed?
Orally composed, starting around, say, 1500 BCE. Maybe earlier components, but that's the general time frame. And crucially, it was transmitted orally for centuries. Memorized, chanted, passed down perfectly by priestly families.
An oral tradition, not written down initially.
Not for a very, very long time. It's an incredible feat of cultural memory.
What's in the Rig Veda? What does it tell us?
It's a collection of 1,028 hymns, suktas, addressed to various deities. It also contains prayers, ritual formulas, some philosophical speculation. It reflects the beliefs, the society, the worldview of these early Indo-Aryan communities.
And their gods, a different set of gods from what the IBC might have had.
Largely, yes. The Rig Veda presents a vibrant polytheistic pantheon. Many are personifications of natural forces, cosmic principles.
Like who? Who are the main players?
Indra is huge, the king of the gods, god of war, storms, thunder, a heroic, powerful figure invoked for victory, smashing enemies, releasing the waters, very much a warrior god.
Okay.
Agni, the god of fire, absolutely central. Not just fire itself, but the fire of the sacrifice, the priest of the gods, the messenger carrying offerings and prayers between humans and the divine realm. He's invoked in the very first hymn of the Rig Veda and countless others.
Fire as an intermediary, that connects back to those potential fire altars in the IBC, maybe.
It's a fascinating potential link, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The prominence of fire ritual seems to span both periods, though the context and theology might differ significantly.
Interesting. Who else? Soma.
Ah, Soma. Very important, very mysterious. Soma is both a sacred plant, we're not 100% sure which one, and the intoxicating hallucinogenic drink made from it, and also the deity embodying it.
So a plant, a drink, and a god.
All three. Offered to the gods, especially Indra, who loved it, and consumed by priests during rituals, likely for inspiration, insight, or communion with the divine.
Any others we should know?
Varuna is significant, an older, perhaps more sovereign god associated with cosmic order, Rata, guardian of universal law, oaths, the night sky, sometimes compared to the Greek Uranus, showing those Indo-European connections.
Right, cosmic order. That sounds important.
It's a fundamental concept. We'll come back to how it evolves. Also Mitra, often paired with the Varuna, associated with contracts, friendship, daylight, honesty.
So a lot of gods tied to nature, social order, warfare.
Very much reflects the concerns of the people composing these hymns. But what's fascinating, as you hinted, is the possibility that some indigenous deities, maybe those IVC fertility goddesses, or even a figure like Pachapati,
Might have influenced this pantheon or been absorbed somehow.
exactly. Maybe some Vedic deities took on attributes of older gods, or perhaps local gods were incorporated over time. It suggests that early process of religious assimilation or dialogue might already be happening, even within the Rig Veda itself.
Okay, so a new pantheon, largely. What about rituals? How did the Vedic people worship?
Sacrifice, yajna. This was absolutely central to Vedic belief and practice.
More central than maybe in the IVC? Or just different?
It seems much more elaborate and textually central, based on the Rig Veda. These yajnas were complex ceremonies, precise offerings, ghee, clarified butter, grains, animals sometimes, and soma were made into the sacred fire.
Accompanied by chanting.
Intricate chants, hymns recited perfectly by specialized priests. The whole ritual complex was designed to nourish the gods, maintain cosmic order, Herota, and achieve specific goals: rain, cattle, long life, victory.
And fire, Agni, was key.
Absolutely central. Agni was the mouth of the gods, the divine messenger carrying the offerings upwards. The ritual couldn't happen without him.
Again, that potential echo of the Indus fire altars.
It's tempting to see a connection, isn't it? Whether it's direct continuation or a shared cultural substrate where fire held ritual significance, or a transformation of earlier practices. It raises that question: how much continuity, how much transformation? The Vedic yajna is certainly more complex and theologically developed in the texts than what we can guess about IVC fire use.
And the Soma ritual you mentioned, that was part of the yajna.
Often, yes. Soma was pressed, mixed, offered to the gods, and consumed by the priests. It seems to have been a key element in inducing altered states or heightened spiritual awareness during the ritual.
Could that have older roots? Like shamanic practices?
That's a theory. Could this focus on a psychoactive plant and mystical experience link back to existing herbal or shamanistic traditions within the Indus Valley or other indigenous groups? It hints perhaps at deep pre-Vedic practices related to sacred plants and altered consciousness being integrated or adapted into the Vedic framework. Another thread suggesting that complex tapestry.
Okay, this is really getting to the heart of it now. Bridging these two worlds, the Indus Valley and the Vedic traditions.
This is where the synthesis happens, or at least where scholars argue it happens. Many really do advocate for significant continuity, that early Hinduism isn't just Vedic, but a blend.
An evolution, maybe, incorporating IDC element.
Exactly, an evolution, assimilation, synthesis of these diverse streams.
So let's revisit some of those potential links more closely. The Pashupati seal and Shiva, that's a big one.
It's probably the most cited example. And going deeper, it's not just a vague resemblance. The specific combination of motifs is striking.
Remind us again.
The yogic posture, being surrounded by animals, Pashupati aspect, the potential multi-faced aspect, like some later Shiva images, the possible phallic or generative symbolism, the association with asceticism and control over nature. These aren't just random traits. They cluster together in ways that strongly echo later iconography of Shiva.
So the argument is, this isn't coincidence.
The argument is that this specific cluster of symbols represents an early form, a prototype, of the concepts later embodied by Shiva. It connects a major Hindu deity directly back to a pre-Vedic archaeological find.
Which is, yeah, incredibly interesting. It really suggests deep roots.
It really does.
What about the fertility cults, those female figurines?
Another strong thread. The sheer number of these Indus figurines, emphasizing fertility, abundance. They're widely seen as precursors to the later, very prominent Hindu goddess cults.
Like Durga, Kali, Lakshmi.
Exactly. While the specific forms and names change, the underlying importance of the divine feminine, of goddess worship, seems to persist. It suggests a powerful, possibly indigenous reverence for female creative power that continues right through into historical Hinduism.
So not just a Vedic male-dominated pantheon, then, a deeper
A
layer.
much deeper, more complex picture, yes.
And water, the great bath connection.
That seems like a very strong continuity, too. The ritual use of water for purification, so evident at Mohenjo-Daro.
Just continues and becomes central in Hinduism.
Precisely. It flows, you could say, right into the Vedic period and beyond. The Ganges, the Yamuna, countless sacred ponds and tanks. The idea of water's purifying power seems unbroken. It suggests a deep-rooted cultural value persisting across millennia.
It's amazing how some core ideas can last that long.
It really is. And think about yoga and meditation.
From the Pashupati seal's posture.
Yes, that yoga-like pose is highly significant. It's tangible evidence suggesting that practices involving disciplined posture, potentially for meditation or inner focus, existed way back then.
Yeah. So the origins of yoga could be that ancient.
Many scholars argue exactly that. This could be the ancient seed, the earliest glimpse of the practices that would eventually blossom into the incredibly sophisticated and diverse yoga traditions of later Hinduism.
Wow. If you connect all those dots, Shiva-like figures, goddess worship, water purification, yoga, it paints a picture of significant continuity.
It does build a compelling case for deep connections and pre-Vedic foundations for many core Hindu elements.
But as you said, not everyone agrees it's that straightforward.
No, there are definitely skeptical voices. Some academics push back, asserting that Vedic beliefs are predominantly Aryan in origin and character,
Arguing the IVC influence was minimal.
or at least not as direct or foundational as the continuity model suggests. They might argue that similarities are coincidental, or that Vedic culture largely superseded what came before, with only minor assimilation. The core theology, the language, the social structure, they'd argue, are fundamentally Vedicarian.
And the main reason this debate can even exist is
The undeciphered script. Always back to the script. Without the Indus people's own words confirming their beliefs or explaining their symbols, we're stuck interpreting material remains and comparing them to much later texts.
so definitive proof is elusive.
Very elusive. The connections remain interpretations, however plausible they seem, which leaves room for debate. What secrets are locked in those symbols? Could they confirm the Shiva link? Or refute it entirely? We just don't know.
Okay, let's try to visualize the interaction itself. Put the two societies side by side. The IVC was.
Primarily settled, agricultural, trade-based, sophisticated urban centers, engineering marvels. Religious focus, it seems, on fertility, nature, maybe cosmic order tied to the rhythms of agriculture and river life.
And the incoming Aryans.
Initially, more pastoral, semi-nomadic, focused on cattle, horses. A warrior ethos is prominent in the Rig Veda. Their deities reflect that sky gods, storm gods, fire, battle. More mole, perhaps, adapting to different landscapes.
So what different lifestyles and maybe worldviews initially?
Yes.
Yeah.
And the critical factor, the engine for the formation of early Hinduism, was the interaction, the merging, the synthesis between these distinct cultures.
Now, you mentioned the IDC declined around 1900 BCE due to various factors.
Yes, a gradual process. Climate change, river shifts, maybe internal issues.
And that time frame coincides with the Aryan migrations.
Strikingly so. The decline of the old urban centers overlaps with the period when Indo-European speakers, the Aryans, are migrating into South Asia. It's a period of profound change and transition.
What new things did the Aryans bring, technologically or culturally?
Well, definitely horse-drawn chariots. That would have been a major military and transport advantage.
Okay.
Iron technology also arrives around this time or becomes more widespread during the later Vedic period, transforming tools, agriculture, warfare, and crucially, their Indo-European language, which evolved into Sanskrit.
The sacred language of the Vedas.
And later classical Hinduism, yes.
Yeah, that old idea, the Aryan invasion theory, that's changed, right?
Massively. It used to be pictured as a swift, violent conquest that destroyed the IVC. But modern archaeology, and especially genetics now, paint a much more complex picture.
More like diffusion, migration.
Exactly. Cultural diffusion seems a better model. Likely multiple waves of migration over centuries. Blending, assimilation, interaction with existing populations, rather than wholesale replacement or just conquest. It was a much longer, more complex process of mixing.
So the Aryans mixed with the people already there, the descendants of the IVC, maybe other groups?
Yes, they mixed with the indigenous populations, many of whom were likely Dravidian speakers, the language family dominant in South India today. This interaction led to a new cultural synthesis, an exchange of genes, ideas, technologies, beliefs.
Does the Rig Veda itself mention these other people?
It does. It refers to groups called dasa, or dasu, often portrayed negatively as enemies or ritually different, but sometimes also as wealthy or having different customs. Many scholars interpret these as references to indigenous peoples, possibly including remnants of the Indus Valley populations. It shows awareness of and interaction with these other groups right from the start.
Okay, so mixing peoples, mixing cultures. What about writing? The IVC had it, but we can't read it. The Vedic people.
A complete contrast. The Vedic period, for centuries, was characterized by a powerful oral tradition.
They didn't write the Vedas down.
Not initially. Not for maybe 1,000 years after the Rig Veda's composition began. They were transmitted purely by mouth, through meticulous memorization, complex recitation techniques, ensuring word-perfect preservation across generations.
Wow. Why oral? Why not write it down sooner?
Good question. Maybe writing wasn't seen as suitable for sacred texts initially. Maybe the oral transmission itself held power and prestige. It certainly reinforced the authority of the priests, the Brahmins, because they were the sole custodians of this vital sacred knowledge.
Yeah.
You had to go through them to access the hymns, the rituals. It made them indispensable cultural and spiritual intermediaries. Writing it down might have democratized it too early, perhaps.
Interesting. So, different approaches to knowledge transmission, too.
Very different.
Okay, so let's pull it all together. Early Hinduism emerges from this grand synthesis.
That's the prevailing view, yes. A synthesis of Indus Valley indigenous beliefs and practices and the incoming Vedic Aryan traditions and language. Not just one or the other, but a profound blending.
A cultural alchemy, you called it earlier.
I think that captures it well, creating something new and incredibly rich from these different elements.
And we can see this synthesis in core Hindu concepts, like Dharma.
Yes, the Vedic concept of Raita, that universal cosmic order, truth, the right way of things, seems to evolve and deepen into the later, absolute fundamental Hindu concept of Dharma.
Dharma meaning?
Righteous conduct, moral duty, cosmic law, one's role in the universe. It takes that idea of cosmic order and makes it very personal and societal, a clear line of conceptual development.
And the gods. The huge number of gods in Hinduism.
That reflects the synthesis perfectly. You have the diverse Indus Valley figures, maybe those fertility goddesses, nature spirits, perhaps the Pashupati figure.
Combined with the extensive Vedic pantheon we discussed, Indra, Agni, Varuna, and many others.
Exactly. They combine, interact, evolve over centuries to form the incredibly rich, multifaceted, and often very inclusive polytheistic structure we see in Hinduism, where different traditions and deities coexist.
Rituals, too.
Sacrifice, a consistent thread. The emphasis on complex sacrificial ceremonies, using fire, specific offerings, chanting. It seems central in both periods, even if the specifics and the theology evolved. It points to ritual as a core, enduring way of interacting with the sacred.
And yoga and meditation.
That potential link from the Indus seals, developing perhaps through ascetic traditions mentioned even in the Vedas, and then flowering in the Upanishads, the later Vedic philosophical texts. It shows this evolving trajectory of mystical, contemplative practices seeking inner truth and liberation. Again, synthesis and development over time.
So despite all we've pieced together, the story isn't completely finished. The debates continue.
Absolutely. The relationship between the Indus Valley and Vedic beliefs remains a really vibrant, sometimes contentious area of academic research. New discoveries, new analyses constantly refine the picture.
And that core question persists. Continuity or rupture.
Exactly. Was it mostly a smooth evolution, a blending, or did the Vedic traditions largely replace what was there, a more significant break, with only minor carryover? Genetic studies suggest significant mixing of peoples, but the extent and nature of the religious integration, that's still debated intensely.
And the Pashupati Shiva link still controversial.
Still a key point of contention. Is it a valid connection showing deep roots? Or is it, as some critics say, a romantic reading, projecting later ideas back onto an ambiguous artifact?
Right.
How much weight do we give that iconographic similarity without text?
And the role of indigenous, maybe Dravidian influences.
That's another huge part of the debate. How much of what we consider core Hinduism, maybe goddess worship, temple rituals, certain philosophical ideas, actually comes from the pre-Aryan, possibly Dravidian-speaking populations? Some scholars argue their contribution was absolutely fundamental, perhaps even dominant in shaping popular Hinduism, challenging the traditional emphasis on Vedicarian origins.
So balancing archaeology, linguistics, genetics, later texts,
Yeah.
it's complicated.
It's incredibly complicated trying to weave together these different strands of evidence, especially when they sometimes seem to point in different directions.
And hanging over it all.
The ultimate barrier, the unsolved Indus script. Its silence is profound. It prevents us from hearing the Indus perspective directly, understanding their religion from the inside.
Leaving so much as educated guesswork, really.
Educated interpretation, yes, informed inference based on patterns and parallels. But without their own words, many connections remain theories, however compelling, not definitive facts. A tantalizing historical void.
So to wrap up, this whole period, the Indus Valley, the Vedic arrival, their interaction, it's one of humanity's most complex, fascinating stories of religious evolution.
Undeniably. The Harappan culture with its cities, its seals, goddesses, water rituals, those yoga-like postures, it clearly laid some kind of fundamental groundwork. It wasn't a blank slate.
And then the Aryan migrations brought the Vedic language, beliefs, ritual.
Which then merged, interacted, synthesized with those powerful indigenous traditions over centuries.
Creating the bedrock of Hinduism.
Exactly. A religion defined by its diversity, its synthesis, its ability to absorb and transform. The Rig Veda gives us our earliest textual glimpse into that dynamic process, capturing the beliefs of emerging world.
So we've covered thousands of years. From those silent planned cities to the powerful Vedic hymns, we've seen how these distinct cultures wove together, forming this incredible spiritual tapestry of early Hinduism.
And what's clear, I think, is that this wasn't a sudden invention, not a single starting point, but a long, complex, messy, fascinating journey. Cultural exchange, adaptation, synthesis.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as we close out this deep dive, here's something for you, our listener, to think about. Imagine if tomorrow someone actually deciphered the Indus script fully.
Oh, wow. That would be monumental.
What new aha moments might leap out? What surprising facts, what connections we never dreamed of? How might it fundamentally reshape our understanding, not just of Hinduism's origins, but maybe of how religions evolve, how cultures interact, how humans make meaning?
It could rewrite history.
It absolutely could. How much more of humanity's ancient spiritual journey is still out there, waiting to be discovered, maybe hidden in plain sight in symbols we just can't read yet?
Something to definitely mull over.
Indeed. Until our next deep dive.